Hi everybody, right, today we are going to look at the rhythm playing of Iron Maiden. So the main point of this is to get you thinking about technique, what technique you need to make these riffs sound like they're supposed to. Learning tab is all well and good, but they're just numbers really on a page. It's only when you start thinking about the technique involved that you start being able to articulate them so they sound like the riffs, the songs that you're trying to learn. So we're going to dive into some key physical elements that are found within Iron Maiden's music. So get ready to saddle up on horseback because we're going to start with looking at something which is known as the gallop. So first of all, we're looking at something which is known as a gallop, and it involves single strings rather than power chords or anything like that. Let me just talk you through the technique involved in this. So with the picking hand, we're playing a pattern of down, down, up, and essentially that is this. Down, down, up, down, down, up, down, down, up, down, down, up. And you can think of it as 1/8 note followed by 2 16th notes. 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4. Okay, so just get that basic pattern into your well, just get used to it and then start speeding it up. And don't worry about moving around positions yet, just get used to that feel of the gallop. See, by now you can already hear that typical Maiden style sound coming in, and we've only just started doing this on one string. So it moves to the 5th fret and the note of D, but only after playing 2 notes on the D string here. Okay, so this is something you want to isolate. Right, so that movement, you've got to go from a upstroke on the A string to a downstroke on the D string, right, when you go to the 4th fret on the D. And that is something that is known as inside picking. Like that, because you're moving from the sides of the strings that are closest to each other, all right? That can be a bit of a tricky movement to get right, so you're going to isolate that. Literally just break it up to something like this. You don't have to play all of the notes up to that point because you're just wasting energy. You just as well just do 1 or 2 gallops and then practice that string crossing downstroke. Like that. Just so you're training yourself on what pick strokes you need to be using, and then you can start speeding that up. And then you can start adding the other notes. And the way I'm doing it, I'm just going down, up, down, and then another down to go on to the D string. But it doesn't really matter. I mean, at the sort of rate that you're playing these, you could even do them as all downstrokes because we're not going fast 16th notes there. You've got time to choose what pick strokes you want for that. You might want to alternate all of them. Completely up to you. And then we just carry that down to the C note and then back up to the D. So I'm just going to play that all the way through slowly and just think about the things I've talked about. And the last thing to mention is the articulation of the sound of these notes. So you notice I'm using palm muting, right? And to get an Iron Maiden sound, you're not really going to clamp your hand against the strings because, you know, we're not trying to sound like Metallica here. This is Iron Maiden, so although we've got some chunky palm muting, it's not really sort of, you're not killing the strings here, you're just resting your hands on enough just to make it percussive and tight and a little bit chunky, right? If we didn't use palm muting, it would sound like this. As you can hear, it's completely different, right? So these things are important. It's important to know when you need to use palm muting and when you don't need to use palm muting. And the very astute among you watching will have noticed that the very first note I play with no palm muting. I'll begin it like this and then go into the palm muting. So literally you're just picking that and your hand is away from the strings, and then when you want to bring the muting in, you just move that underside of your hand, that outer edge, just touch the strings whilst you're playing, and that's what gets that sound. And you need to just get that right balance of where your hand is. Too far back towards the bridge and you're not going to get enough of an effect. So you've got to bring it forward a bit. Somewhere there. If you're too far forward, you start killing the note entirely and the note doesn't come through. You just get this chaka chaka percussive sound. See how the note disappears? That's why it's important to find the sweet spot. Right, let's move on to exercise 2 now. Right, so as you can hear, we've still got that dun 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 gallop sound, but now we're using power chords, and that changes everything, right? So instead of this single note sound, now we've got a chunky root and fifth based power chord, right? Which is E5, and then we're using a D5, right? So we're just moving between those two. Now the gallop, now we're still using down, down, up, down, down, up, down, down, up for our picking pattern, but because we've got a chord, it's going to be slightly different. You hit the power chord with the downstroke, and you're hitting the A string and the D string there together, right? So you go down, and then the pedal tones in between. A pedal tone is basically a repeating note, which is the same note which keeps occurring whilst other notes move around either side of it, all right? And we're hitting the low E. And I'll have to talk you through the articulation again, because you can hear that I'm using palm muting, and that changes the sound of it. Okay, so for the first hit, if you will, I'm just hitting a downstroke like that, and I'm not muting it. But then as soon as I go to the open E, I start with the palm muting and then carry it on. So it's like this. Yeah. And you can hear I'm also palm muting the chord itself, so it goes from being like this to this. And you can hear the effect of that. It basically shortens the note, and it just makes it all a bit tightened up and more contained. And that's what gives it that percussive sound. That's why metal bands use it so much, you know, because otherwise it would all be so messy. You know, you'd never get the clarity and the intricacy of a lot of the riffs in metal if everything was played cleanly with no palm muting. Palm muting tightens notes up, makes them more focused, and it gives it that chunky sound which implies weight and heaviness. And it's worth noting, when you do play chords, or basically when you play more than one string with palm muting, it does add a bit of extra resistance when you're picking, so you'll notice it feels different. If you're doing this, you don't have as much resistance, but because your hand is kind of touching the strings, you've got to give a slightly bit more action, a slight bit more of force with the picking motion to get past that inertia of your hand resting against the strings. So it does feel different when you do palm muting, all right? Anyway, so the technique is the same. You're basically going down, down, up, down, down, up, down, down, up, down. And then when we hit those chords, it's just clean, like that. No palm muting, all right? Again, let me play it without palm muting. You can hear how different it sounds and how it's just not the same, all right? So now you can see why learning tab, just seeing a load of numbers on a page, doesn't really tell you the full story. You really need to start thinking about how it sounds. This is why technique is important. In this case, with the technique we're talking about a lot is palm muting, but now we're going to move on and things are going to become a little bit more intricate and involved. Right, so here's exercise 3. Okay, so it's very similar to the previous exercise that we've just done, but you'll notice that there's a different motif here, a single note line which uses alternate picking, and then we've got some different chords. We've got C5 and then a D5 again, and then it goes up here to a G5. Right. So technically it starts off the same with that chunky gallop, but then we need to go right, and it starts on the 9th fret on the note of E. And it crosses on to the D string. And you start that on a downstroke and alternate everything. So you're going down, up, down, up. And I'm using my little finger there and then my first finger on the 5th fret. It just gives you the reach that you need without really stretching your hands too much. And from there you can go down to the C5, easy enough. And then start it again. So after this, when you move down to the C5, notice that there's another stroke of that chord without palm muting. You go, that really gives you the force of that sound. You're moving from a different tonality. You've got that E sound, the E5 sound, and then that little motif, and then goes right down at the bottom. It's like a real exclamation mark saying we're moving chord, you know. And then resume that muted gallop, and then when you move up to the D5, you keep it muted. You don't do another stroke like that. The other thing that is different is when you go down to the C5 and the D5, instead of using the open E string as the pedal note in between you're actually using the fretted root note of the chord, right? So it's going to have a different feel again. So you're going to go like that instead of going. So you're not moving as far, you're just picking the two notes of that power chord, the A and the D, and then you're just hitting the root note on the A string. So your picking has to be more contained. You're not moving as much as you would if you're doing this. You can put a bit more energy into this, but for these ones you have to be more contained. Otherwise you're going to start hitting the open E and strings that you don't want, like that, okay? And this alternate picking is a great example of Iron Maiden using alternate picking quite a lot in their riffs and their motifs, alright? And it doesn't require you to be an amazingly fast alternate picker, but you really do want a good basic foundational grasp of alternate picking to be able to articulate some of these lines, because it's just not going to be the same trying to do it with economy picking. You're going to have to miss out certain notes and use hammer-ons and pull-offs, and it's not going to have that percussive element that some of these riffs do need. They do need that sort of impact, the note velocity, and economy doesn't always allow for that, alright? So it's just worth knowing, even if you are someone who likes economy picking, you can still build up your base alternate picking abilities to tackle a lot of rhythm playing. So totally different kind of galloping feel. This is more of a 12/8 time signature feel, which gives you a 1 2 3 4 5 6 1 2 3 4 5 6 fast kind of triplet. And technique wise, we're using the same kind of techniques we've seen so far. We're using palm muting with some occasional alternate picking with some just clean downstrokes and clean upstrokes. So I start off hitting that chord twice, the E5, and you'll notice that I'm using the root, the 5th, and then the octave. So we've got 3 notes now, a 3-note power chord as opposed to the more simplified 2-note power chord, right? basically we need to hit this chord twice cleanly and then do the muting. So 1, 2, 3, like that. But once we've got that first one done, we cannot do down up anymore. We have to go up like that, because those 3 muted notes in between will put your pick on a downstroke on the 3rd note. So you have to do up. Just by process of elimination, you have to, all right? But that's fine, because when we start, you can do whatever pick stroke you want, right? Because you've got time to start. But once you're underway, it's going to revert to upstroke. So just watch my picking hand and you'll know what I mean. So all we're doing is we're moving between E5, D5, E5, and then down to the C5. And then we've got this sequence there, right? So we've just got a clean G5 power chord, which is only using the root and the 5th. And you can play that however you want. I'm just using the 1st and the little finger there, because it makes it easier to go down to that chord, which is a D 1st inversion, because you are playing the major 3rd of the note of the chord of D as your lowest note, right? And then I've got the D note there as the 2nd note, right? Now these are brilliant chord shapes to use. You'll find them in all sorts of music. It's a really simplified way of playing a chord, really, which is 2 notes, and it's basically the power chord version of a major chord. Right? It's really good. And you'll find that a lot. Once you start using that shape and you're playing, it opens up a whole lot of possibilities, right? Playing sequences like this can be a little bit tough to keep it sounding clean, because you've got to hit all those notes and then immediately go to the palm muting. So as always, I recommend you just stay in one position and get used to the feel of this. A lot of the challenge of getting good at playing rhythm is about containing the movement of your picking hand. Sometimes you need it to really move freely, and then at other times you really need to contain it so you're not hitting unwanted strings and things like that. So that's just one challenging aspect. And then with rock and metal, another challenging aspect is the use of palm muting, and being able to move from palm muting to no palm muting at will at any time is a skill you really need to develop. Okay, you should be able to do that so that you can go from muted to non-palm muted whenever the riff requires you to do so, because that is what enables you to get these riffs sounding like the bands whose material you're learning, right? So if you're learning a Maiden song and you want it to sound like Maiden, it's not just about learning the notes on the fretboard and then just bluffing your way through it. You really do want it to sound like them. So it's knowing when to palm mute, when not to palm mute, things like that. So this motif requires the use of alternate picking, but you'll notice that there's also a pull-off on the D string from the 5th fret to the 4th fret. Yeah, and that means you can go from a downstroke on the D string to a downstroke on the A string, because we've missed out the need to perform an upstroke due to using a pull-off there, right? So I can just go down, pull off, down, and then from there get back into the alternate pick strokes. Now, there is a string crossing motion here where you have to pick a downstroke on the A string, followed by an upstroke on the D string, right? Here, down, up. And that's known as outside picking because your pick is changing string by moving from the sides of the strings which are furthest from each other. So it's going down, then over the D string, and then going up. So it's important to actually get some sort of foundation with alternate picking. you know, just so you can do stuff like this. Like I said, you don't have to be a speed demon with alternate picking, but it really does help you to be able to articulate riffs and licks like this. And you'll notice the sound as well. So that first note, I play cleanly and then pull off, and then palm mute these next two notes and then clean. So your picking hand has to do this kind of dance where you're coming back to the strings for palm muting and then come away so you can see as my picking hand moves up, you can see it's moving away, then you can see it when it comes back. And as you get better at this, your hand can be more contained and a bit closer to the guitar, but I'm exaggerating it for effect. Like that, okay? So it is important that you actually get some sort of foundation with alternate picking, and if you need more help with that, look, just go and grab a copy of my free course, The Warm-Up, all right? It's online streaming, you don't have to download anything, you just log in, you can access it anytime for life, all right? Lifetime access on that, so you can work on that anytime you want. And if you want to take your alternate picking even further, go and check out my badass alternate picking course, right? It's a 5-week picking course. It's gonna take your picking to the next level. It's got everything you need to sort your alternate picking out. If you just follow it and do what I've outlined for you in that course, your picking is going to be better than ever. Just do it, all right? If you want to really get better at that technique, you know what to do. Okay, let's look at exercise 6. Right, let's talk about the pick strokes and the notes first, and then we'll talk about the articulation. So what I've done is I've taken one of the riffs from Aces High and I've extended it a little bit so you can keep cycling it again and again so you can really nail the technique down which is involved in something like this. So, the notes themselves, D, E. Alright, so that's 5 and 7 if you prefer. And on the D string we've got the 5th, back to the E, and then the 7th, back to the E, and then the 9th fret, then back to the E. Alright. And the pick strokes are as follows. So you go down, hammer on, up, down, up, down, down, up, down, down. And you'll notice that there's a lot of upstrokes there, and that's just the way it goes because you're missing out a lot of notes. The rhythm of these notes are 16th notes, and there's a lot of rests in this riff, and the notes are sort of implied in between. You know, you can hear the da 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 da. So that 16th note pulse is implied, but it's not actually played. You're instead doing rests, all right? Pauses, in other words. And it's a little bit hard to get the rhythm right because the picking hand is probably going to want to keep going because you've got the momentum of the speed of this riff. But you've actually got to restrain that hand and not play more notes than it needs, and you've got to like just do those rests instead. And you'll notice that the very first part of this has a hammer on rather than down, up. The rest of them are all down, up, down. But this one is just down, hammer on, up, down. But it's still the same amount of notes. We're just not picking the second note there, we're just using a hammer on. And the other notable thing about this riff is that it requires you to perform a motion known as inside picking, all right? So the downstroke on the D string, followed by the upstroke on the A string, means that your pick is changing strings between the strings rather than crossing over it. So you're between them, like that. And it's a little bit constrained, and it makes it feel like it's more difficult to move. So it does take a little bit of work to get used to this, right? And something like this is a good way of getting used to inside picking without having to play a really intense picking lick, all right? So you're only playing one instance of an inside picked motion, just here. And then you get a little bit of respite away from it before you do it again. So it's important that you spend the time working on this, otherwise you're going to have a hard time playing stuff like Aces High or any other Maiden songs that require this type of string crossing motion, okay? So for the fretting hand, I'm really using the first and the third finger for most of it. But then when it comes to this note here, I'm actually going to bring the little finger around to hit the D string, rather than try and just use the third finger to flatten down and hit that note, because I don't know, the clarity isn't quite there. You can do it, but it's a bit fiddly. I would rather just bring the little finger round to do that, and then the little finger again does final duty on the 9th fret of the D string there. Okay, so the articulation. So when it comes to the articulation of this riff, notice that the first and the last note of each grouping have no palm muting, but attempt to put palm muting for the rest of it. So it's like, I'm just going to repeat this one, for example. Yeah, so aim to like emphasize that note and the last note. You might hit the second note with no palm muting as well. It doesn't really matter, like that. As long as there's a little bit of palm muting on some of those upstrokes. If you don't do that, it's just going to sound like this. Which is okay, but it doesn't really quite have that percussive clarity that it does if you use a bit of muting. And this sequence is a difficult sequence. It's not easy at all. If you listen to any isolated guitar tracks of Iron Maiden when they've performed Aces High live, they nearly always play that bit completely differently to it is on the album version. And it's no wonder. I mean, if you go out and you play that song live, it's the very first song, the adrenaline's pumping, and it's the first song out. You're not 100% warmed up yet. It's, you know, you're fizzing all over, and you've got to play something that is that precise and requires that amount of clarity. It's no wonder they played it slightly differently live and added notes here and there. You know, it's always different. You know, so it's always been hard to exactly identify what's going on during that section. So for that, you really do need to listen to the album version to get an idea on how it was written originally. And it just goes to show how technical stuff like this is and why technique is important. It's not just about notes on the tab. You really need to know how to articulate these things. That's why technique is necessary. People think that things like alternate picking are just for people who want to be shred demons. That's not true. You need alternate picking and techniques like even legato as well. You need these techniques to articulate guitar playing in general. You need them for rhythm playing. You need them for small motifs that are not classified as lead guitar playing but still use the same techniques. You know, if you can't do hammer-ons and pull-offs, you're going to struggle with many riffs out there which use them, all right? And if you can't do alternate picking, again, you're going to struggle with many riffs out there which require that technique, all right? That's why technique is important. You don't have to be a shred demon. You just need to get a handle on what you need to be able to make these songs sound like the originals. Right, exercise 7. So again, we've got more single note motifs here, and this one is, well, I'm going to play it. I'm not going to spoil the surprise. I'll play it and then we'll talk about it afterwards. Yeah, so you can tell that this is based on the song Tail Gunner, but I've extended it to turn it into a lick that you can cycle as many times as you want, and you can turn this into a real monster exercise to work on your stamina. And look, it is alternate picking all the way through. There's no apologies for that. That is exactly what this is, and you really can't play it any other way. You could try and fudge it somehow by using economy, but it's not going to have this kind of sound, and you're going to have to miss some notes out. So don't worry if you can't get this lick very fast. It's more about getting you to use alternate picking and controlling the sound of the notes. And you'll notice that I'm using palm muting all the way through this exercise, and as I've said before earlier on, it really can be a challenge to maintain palm muting while you're performing string crossing alternate picking, because the palm muting does add a little bit of extra inertia that you have to get over because your hand's resting against the strings, whereas if you're away from the strings you feel a little bit freer. Okay, so it does feel different, and you may want to learn this exercise with no palm muting at first, right? Just get it memorized, and then when you get comfortable with it, start adding in the palm muting, but keep it light. You know, it's not Metallica here. We're not chug, 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 chug. We're not really chug, chug, chug. It's just, and it will feel different playing palm muted licks on higher strings as well. Everyone's used to doing palm muting on lower strings, but when we do it on these high strings like that, you're going to encounter lots of other noises and blips and things that you don't want. All right, so you are going to have to be a bit aware of unwanted sound. Now you'll notice that my fretting hand, I played this riff two different ways. First I started off by doing it like this, where I used the index finger to tackle the 3rd fret on both of these strings, and then I did it like this, where I used the 2nd finger instead to tackle the 3rd fret of the G string. All right, so you can do it either way. Just know that if you use your index finger for everything, you're going to have to sort of get used to using that first knuckle joint to bend. So when you don't need it on the G string, you're just angled like that. So your finger is angled and you're just fretting the D string. But when you do need it on the G string, you just flatten it down and then you can play the note you need to. All right, or you can do it the other way, which is you just use your 2nd finger like that. And then you can let the pinky and the 3rd finger tackle the notes which are higher up there. All right, so there's two different ways of doing it. And look, if you want to go further into the lead guitar aspect of Iron Maiden, I have got a course which teaches you the styles of Dave, Adrian and Yannick, right? The 3 amigos of Iron Maiden. So like the warm-up, it's also online streaming. You've got lifetime access to it, so you can just open that up and work on it anytime. No need to download everything. But that will really go through and teach you their styles. So if you want to go further into the lead guitar playing of Iron Maiden, go and check that out. But in the meantime, just go and grab the warm-up, the free course I mentioned earlier. It will really help sort out your alternate picking and your fretting hand too. Everything starts there from a foundation of technique. You need these techniques for rhythm guitar just as much as you need them for lead guitar. All right, so you will have seen in this video the examples of these exercises. It's not just about learning the notes that are involved in these riffs. It's about learning how to articulate them using technique, and technique which controls sound, such as palm muting, right? So all of these aspects really are important. So once you've mastered these basic aspects of using palm muting, being able to switch between palm muting and no palm muting, being able to nail the gallop, and then being able to get good at doing some string crossing picking motions such as inside picking and outside picking, once you've got those elements together, you can take them and then you can learn any Iron Maiden song that you want. So I hope you've enjoyed this and you've learned something today, and you can take it away with your playing. Look at the tab, rewatch everything that I've talked about, think about technique, and yeah, just go and enjoy it. So up the irons. I'll see you guys again soon.